Okay, what do I mean when I say that Romantasy lies? I mean that it lies about love. Now, don't get me wrong, I love fantasy and I love romance. I wouldn't say I love the genre of romance, but I like a story. I really, really enjoy a story that is about a real romantic relationship. The problem that I have with Romantasy is that that's not what it's about. The most interesting thing in fantasy is that you get to take this fantastical world and you get to change some of the rules. You can add magic and you can add creatures that don't exist. And you can put people in these scenarios that we can't see in real life. And then you get to watch them and find out how they'll react in this different world with these different rules. And that allows us to see or to investigate and explore truths about human emotion and relationships and psychology in a new way, in a way that we don't see it in the real world. And that's what I think is so interesting and fun about fantasy. That's why I love fantasy. So this could be a personal problem because if you're somebody who just reads fantasy purely for escapism, and just purely entertainment, and that's all, like almost, like how sometimes people watch sitcoms. Not all sitcoms. Some sitcoms have more depth and the comedy is satirical in a way that, is really saying something about social life and culture and all that kind of thing. But just like the much more surface level sitcoms, that level of entertainment where it's just like passing the time while you're bored. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We need to pass the time when we're bored. And sometimes you just want to scroll or you just want to watch something entertaining. But that's not why I read fantasy. I don't read it just to kind of blank out my mind. When I read, I really love thinking and getting into the depth of who people are and morality and conflicts and empathy and just like really thinking about different ideas that are presented in stories. And fantasy does this so well because it has that added layer, that added world that other fiction doesn't have. And I like that about science fiction as well, and horror. This is why I love speculative fiction, because all of those types of stories bring in this extra element, and then we get to see people react to it. And then what I get out of it, or when I think that it's best, when I really love a story, is when I see something real about human nature, when I get to see how people interact with these elements and how it affects their relationships and their choices and their conflicts and their emotions. And I get to think about what it means to be human and what we do in situations and how things affect us and how they'd affect me. And I get to live a human journey that feels real, even though I'm in a magical world. That's the most interesting element to me. My problem then with Romantasy is that it's not real. The people aren't real and the relationships aren't real. So even though I would love to have a story that involves romance and a new beginning romance with all the fun, cutesy, flirty things that we do at the beginning of a romance, in a fantasy realm, I have a ton of trouble actually finding that when I read fantasy stories, because Romantasy doesn't offer it, and fantasy can offer it sometimes and in different ways, but it's usually, if it's not a Romantasy, a lot of fantasy that I have encountered doesn't have a big relationship element like that in it. It might be like a very small piece of it. And I would like to just see that developed more in fantasy. So let's get a little bit deeper into this idea that the relationships and the people feel fake to me in Romantasy. From my understanding, the romance genre and the Romantasy genre, which is primary romance, like inside of a fantasy story, the goal of those types of fiction is wish fulfillment. That's the number one, is to create this sort of relationship of wish fulfillment perfection that you could never actually have in real life. And I think you can see that if you just look at how characters are described in Romantasy. If I look at the two top Romantasy books that I think everyone knows, which is Fourth Wing and ACOTAR, you see this. So with Fourth Wing, which to be fair, I DNF'd Fourth Wing pretty quickly. I don't even know how far I got, but she had like just got into the school place. It wasn't very far, but she meets Xaden very early in the story, and her description of him is, he's tall with wind-blown black hair and dark brows. The line of his jaw is strong and covered by warm, tawny skin and dark stubble. And when he folds his arms across his torso, the muscles in his chest and arms ripple, moving in a way that makes me swallow. And his eyes are the shade of gold-flecked onyx. The contrast is startling, jaw-dropping even. Everything about him is. His features are so harsh that they look carved, and yet they're astonishingly perfect, like an artist worked a lifetime sculpting him, and at least a year of that was spent on his mouth. Even the diagonal scar that bisects his left eyebrow and marks the top corner of his cheek only makes him hotter. So you can see there that isn't that's not a description of a real person. She even says it himself. He's astonishingly perfect. And even the one thing about him that is a flaw isn't a flaw. It makes him hotter, right? And then if you think about ACOTAR, when Feyre meets Rhysand for the first time, she says he's the most beautiful man she's ever seen. So again, a level of perfection that is impossible for real people. Like, these are not real people. And that's not even a criticism, because that's what Romantasy is. That's what the readers want. They want that. So the writers are giving them that, right? So I'm not like criticizing that they're written like this. I'm just pointing out that they're not supposed to be real. They're supposed to be wish fulfillment. And that's why the descriptions of these characters is so over the top. And it's the same with the main characters, the female main characters that are often in a Romantasy. They're also like over the top, stunning perfection, that kind of thing. And a second idea that goes along with this sort of fakeness that I see in Romantasy is often the relationship conflict. So a lot of times these characters are presented, especially if it's a female main character in a female male romance, then the male character will often be presented like, is he the bad guy? He's doing something wrong. He hates her, and like she believes this about him at the beginning of the story, but then we come to find that the whole conflict isn't actually real. He is actually perfect, and everything that he's doing is for her, and all the things that she thought were bad about him or that she was concerned about was just fake. It was an illusion. He had to pretend to be that way for some reason. Or there was a big piece of the picture that she wasn't seeing, that once she found out, she knew who he really was. And he really was perfect. Not just in description of his physical or his physicality, but in his emotions and the way that he thinks about her and acts in the world as well. That is also all complete perfection. And that's where the conflict lies in these stories. They have to learn, the main character has to learn that the romantic partner or potential romantic partner is actually completely good in every way, because that's the wish fulfillment. And again, that's on purpose. So it's not that it's badly done. The writers are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. It's just that, to me, it's not interesting. This is the problem for me. I don't, once somebody's perfect, and I know that the conflict isn't even going to be a real conflict, it's just going to be a misunderstanding, then, or some sort of illusion, then I don't care anymore. Like, what is this even doing for me? Because I'm not there for escapism. So if you are there for escapism, then it's fine, it's great. But for me, it's just, I want to think, I want to experience a realistic feeling relationship. I want to see characters who are vulnerable and who are wrong and who make mistakes, and a relationship that has to build and grow, you know, within those mistakes, with those mistakes happening, with these people that are real and are having to interact with the world around them with realistic responses, and build a life and a relationship with the person, with the romantic interest that's there. That's where the interest comes in. That's where I feel like a story is doing more. It's doing something that matters, because I feel like it's a real human that I can learn something from, and that it can make me think about the world in different ways or explore relationship dynamics in different ways. But when it's all just perfection and misunderstanding, there's nothing left for me to do, and it ends up not being entertaining for me. It ends up being very bland. So I think we've gotten to the point where you probably understand what it is that I would like to see in the relationships in fantasy stories, which is realistic relationships, people who make mistakes. I would love to see the beginning of relationships, the honeymoon period, the cutesy, flirtsy things, the excitement, and all that goes along with the beginning of a relationship. But I would like to see it in a realistic way. We can get past that stage later in the story and see how the characters deal with each other when they're being their whole, full, true selves, when the hormones and chemicals in the brain have all relaxed, and now you see a person without that, right? And you can start to have conflict. I would love to see more of that in fantasy stories, where the relationships and the emotions feel true and really human and interesting in that way, but with the backdrop of this different type of world that the characters are dealing with, and maybe, you know, different social or cultural situations, or, you know, different rules, like with magic or dragons or whatever else is there. But I want to see people who sometimes hurt each other, because that's what we do. That's what being human is, and it's not always because of misunderstandings. I want to see people who have to grow together. So at the end of the day, fantasy isn't powerful for me because it lets us escape humanity. It's powerful for me because it lets us see humanity more clearly, and see relationships and experiment with what it means to be human in different layers. So that's why Romantasy lies, and why I would like to see more truthful relationships as a heavy part of the story in fantasy books. So if you think I'm wrong, tell me why in the comments. If you think I'm completely misjudging or have a misunderstanding of Romantasy, tell me that too. I mean, I did have some fun reading ACOTAR. I found it entertaining at times. There's some things that really made me mad about it. I'm not going to get into that in this video, and some big problems I had with it. But I found a lot of fun with it too. And I think Moss is good at writing those little flirty interactions in a cute way that's enjoyable to read. But yeah, I just want something bigger or something more. But if you think I'm totally wrong, I would love to discuss that in the comments. Or if you know any of these types of stories that I'm talking about where they have really deep relationships that feel truthful but are set in fantasy, then I would love recommendations, because I'm always trying to find that and I find it extremely difficult. So let me know any thoughts, any recommendations, and that is all.